Before time long ago, before the sun lit up our sky, before Earth existed as we know it, the universe was a different place. In the depths of space, where darkness reigned absolute and the stars were still young, something extraordinary was about to happen. This is the story of Nyxthar, a world that should never have existed, a planet born from the shadows and forged in primordial chaos. To understand Nyxthar, we must go back to a time when our solar system was merely a cloud of gas and dust slowly swirling in the void. There were no planets, no moons, just particles floating in the dark, drawn together by an invisible force we call gravity. Chapter 1. Birth in the Darkness. Imagine a place where light never reached, a forgotten corner of the universe where only cold and darkness existed. It was there, in that frozen void, that Nyxthar began to form. Unlike Earth, which was born near the warmth of the young sun, Nyxthar emerged in the most distant and inhospitable regions of the primordial solar nebula. The first particles that would form Nyxthar were tiny, smaller than grains of sand. But they had something special. They were rich in heavy elements, metals, and minerals created in the hearts of ancient stars that had exploded long before our sun was born. These particles began to clump together, slowly at first, forming small aggregates. Over millions of years, these aggregates grew. Each collision between rock fragments added more mass to the forming body. It was a violent and chaotic process. Rocks the size of mountains collided at unimaginable speeds, melting upon impact and fusing into an ever larger mass. Nyxthar grew in the shadows, far from the direct influence of the newborn sun. Its composition was unique. While inner planets like Earth formed mainly from rock and metal, Nyxthar accumulated enormous amounts of volatile materials, water ice, frozen methane, ammonia, and complex organic compounds. It was a world of ice and darkness, but also of infinite possibilities. Chapter 2. The Primordial Surface. When Nyxthar finally took shape as a complete planet, its surface was a spectacle of terrifying beauty. Imagine a landscape where black ice mountains rose against a starless sky. The ground was a mixture of dark rocks and ice crystals that glowed faintly with light from distant cosmic radiation. The temperature on Nyxthar's surface was incomprehensible to us, around -240 degrees Celsius, so cold that the air itself, if there were any, would solidify and fall as snow. But Nyxthar had an atmosphere, thin and tenuous, composed of noble gases and traces of volatile compounds that managed to remain gaseous even in that extreme cold. Ice volcanoes dotted the landscape. These cryovolcanoes didn't spew hot lava like Earth's volcanoes, but rather liquid ice, water mixed with ammonia and methane that erupted from the planet's depths. When this cold lava reached the surface, it froze instantly, creating bizarre and beautiful formations. Nyxthar's sky was a spectacle in itself. Without the light of a nearby sun, the firmament was a tapestry of absolute darkness, dotted only by the faint lights of distant stars. Occasionally, ghostly auroras danced on the horizon, caused by charged particles from the solar wind that managed to penetrate the planet's weak magnetic field. Chapter 3. The Pulsing Core. But the true story of Nyxthar wasn't on its frozen surface. The planet's heart held extraordinary secrets. Deeply buried beneath layers of ice and rock, Nyxthar's core was a place of intense heat and unimaginable pressures. While the surface remained frozen in eternal darkness, the planet's interior teemed with energy. The heat came from two main sources. First, the planet's formation process itself had generated enormous amounts of energy. Each asteroid impact, each collision of rocky fragments, had converted motion into heat. That energy remained trapped in Nyxthar's depths. The second source of heat was even more fascinating. Radioactive elements, uranium, thorium, and potassium, inherited from the dead stars that preceded our solar system, decayed slowly in Nyxthar's core, releasing steady heat that warmed the planet from within. This extreme contrast between a frozen exterior and a hot interior created unique conditions. Between the frozen surface and the fiery core, there were layers where the temperature and pressure were perfect for something extraordinary. Liquid water. Chapter 4. The hidden ocean. Kilometers below Nyxthar's frozen crust, protected from the darkness and cold of space by a thick layer of ice, existed an ocean. Not a small one, but a vast global sea that enveloped the entire planet, containing more water than all of Earth's oceans combined. This subsurface ocean was different from any body of water we know. The water was kept liquid by the combination of the planet's internal heat and the immense pressure from the overlying ice layers. It was a dark ocean, completely isolated from external light, but full of energy and possibilities. The ocean floor was dotted with hydrothermal vents, fissures in Nyxthar's inner crust from which superheated mineral-rich water spewed. These vents were like oases of energy in a world of darkness. Around them, complex chemical compounds formed and dissolved in endless cycles. The chemistry of this ocean was fascinating. The water wasn't pure, but a complex solution of salts, minerals, and organic compounds. Dissolved sulfur, methane, ammonia, and carbon dioxide created a rich and dynamic chemical environment. Currents moved these substances through the ocean, mixing them and allowing increasingly complex chemical reactions. Chapter 5. The Dance of Gravity. Nyxthar wasn't alone on its journey through space. The primitive planet shared its region of the solar system with countless other bodies, asteroids, comets, and forming protoplanets. The gravitational dance between these objects was a chaotic and violent choreography. Large celestial bodies passed close to Nyxthar regularly, their gravities pulling and pushing the young planet. Each close encounter slightly altered Nyxthar's orbit, causing it to drift slowly through the solar system. Sometimes these encounters resulted in cataclysmic collisions. One such collision was particularly transformative. A protoplanet the size of Mars collided with Nyxthar at an oblique angle. The impact was so powerful that it melted parts of both worlds' surfaces. Vaporized rocks were ejected into space, forming a temporary ring around Nyxthar. But the impact did more than destroy. It also created. The collision sped up Nyxthar's rotation, making the planet spin faster. It also injected new materials into the world, including more heavy metals that sank to the core, strengthening the planet's magnetic field. And most importantly, the heat generated by the impact melted vast amounts of ice, expanding the subsurface ocean. Chapter 6. The Chemistry of Life. In Nyxthar's dark ocean, far from any sunlight, something remarkable was happening. The hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor weren't just sources of heat and minerals. They were also natural chemical factories, where simple molecules were transformed into increasingly complex compounds. The hot water spewing from the vents was loaded with hydrogen, sulfur, and methane. When this hot water met the cold ocean water, it created temperature and chemical concentration gradients that drove reactions. It was like having millions of tiny chemical laboratories operating simultaneously on the ocean floor. Amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, began to form. Nucleotides, components of DNA and RNA, also appeared. These molecules weren't alive, but they were the necessary ingredients for life. They floated in the ocean, colliding with each other, sometimes joining into longer chains. Microscopic pores in the rocks around the hydrothermal vents offered protection for these fragile molecules. Within these tiny spaces, shielded from the ocean's strong currents, complex molecules could accumulate and interact for longer periods. Some of these interactions resulted in even more complex structures. Chapter 7. The First Spark. In a microscopic pore near a particularly active hydrothermal vent, something extraordinary happened. A chain of organic molecules, by pure chance, acquired the ability to copy itself. It was an imperfect and slow copy, but it was replication. This was Nyxthar's first self-replicating molecule, the distant ancestor of what could become life. This primitive molecule wasn't life in the full sense. It had no cell, no metabolism, no consciousness. But it had the fundamental characteristic that defines life: the ability to reproduce and pass information to the next generation. Over time, these self-replicating molecules spread. Some copies had errors, mutations that made them slightly different. Most of these mutations were harmful, causing the molecule to stop functioning. But occasionally, A mutation made the molecule better at copying itself, or more resistant to the ocean's harsh conditions. These improved variants reproduced faster, becoming more common. It was the beginning of evolution on Nyxthar. Not the evolution of complex creatures, but chemical evolution. Natural selection operating at the molecular level. The molecules that survived and reproduced were those best adapted to the extreme environment of the deep ocean. Chapter 8. The first protocells. The self-replicating molecules needed protection. Floating freely in the ocean, they were vulnerable to strong currents that could separate them from important resources, or carry them to hostile environments where they couldn't function. The solution came in the form of membranes. Certain organic molecules, called lipids, had an interesting property. One end was attracted to water while the other repelled it. In solution, these molecules naturally organized into hollow spheres called vesicles, with a double layer of lipids forming a bubble. When self-replicating molecules got trapped inside these vesicles, something magical happened. The vesicle protected the molecules from the external environment, creating a controlled microenvironment. Nutrients could enter through the membrane, but the self-replicating molecules stayed inside, concentrated and protected. These protocells, as they are called, were primitive beyond imagination. They had no DNA, no ribosomes, none of the complexities of a modern cell. But they were a crucial step. They were packets of chemical information protected by a membrane, floating in Nyxthar's dark ocean. Chapter 9. Metabolism emerges. Replication alone wasn't enough. Protocells needed energy to function and copy themselves. That energy had to come from somewhere. In Nyxthar's ocean, far from any sunlight, the energy source had to be chemical. Some protocells developed the ability to capture energy from chemical reactions. The chemical gradients around the hydrothermal vents were rich in potential energy. Reduced compounds like hydrogen and hydrogen sulfide, found in the hot vent water, reacted with oxidized compounds like sulfate and carbon dioxide in the cold ocean. Protocells that could facilitate these reactions and capture the released energy had a huge advantage. They could replicate faster and survive in conditions where other protocells died. It was the birth of metabolism, the ability to extract energy from the environment and use it to power vital processes. Different lineages of protocells developed different metabolic strategies. Some used sulfur, others methane, still others hydrogen. This metabolic diversity meant that different types of protocells could thrive in different parts of Nyxthar's ocean. Chapter 10. Evolution accelerates. Over time, Nyxthar's protocells became more sophisticated. Random mutations and natural selection refined their capabilities. Self-replicating molecules evolved to store more information more efficiently. Membranes became more selective, allowing nutrients in while keeping toxic products out. A crucial innovation was the development of biological catalysts, precursors to modern enzymes. These molecules sped up specific chemical reactions, allowing protocells to operate more efficiently. A reaction that would take millions of years to occur spontaneously could happen in seconds with the right catalyst. Competition between different protocell lineages intensified. Resources like certain minerals or organic compounds were limited. Protocells that could obtain them more efficiently survived better. This created pressure for innovation. New metabolic capabilities emerged. New ways of storing information were tested. Some lineages formed symbiotic associations, working together for benefits neither could achieve alone. Others became parasites, exploiting the metabolism of other protocells for their own gain. Nyxthar's dark ocean was becoming a complex ecosystem, even if its inhabitants were merely primitive microscopic beings. Chapter 11. The Universal Code. Among all the self-replicating molecules that arose in Nyxthar's ocean, one proved particularly effective: RNA. This molecule had an extraordinary property. It could store information in its structure like a chemical computer tape, but it could also act as a catalyst, speeding up chemical reactions. RNA became the standard among Nyxthar's protocells. Those that used RNA to store their genetic instructions and catalyze their metabolic reactions consistently outperformed other variants. Over time, RNA became universal, the basis of all life chemistry on Nyxthar. Later, a related molecule called DNA emerged. DNA was even better at stably storing information. It was like upgrading from a cassette tape to a hard drive. Protocells that used DNA for long-term storage and RNA for daily operations had a decisive advantage. Proteins, long chains of amino acids, evolved to become the molecular workers of the cells. Each protein had a specific three-dimensional shape that allowed it to perform a particular task: breaking down nutrients, building membranes, replicating DNA. The genetic code in the DNA specified exactly which proteins to build. Chapter 12. The first true cells. After hundreds of millions of years of molecular evolution, Nyxthar's primitive protocells had transformed into true cells. These cells were still microscopic and simple by modern standards, but incomparably more complex than the original protocells. Each cell was a sophisticated molecular machine. Its membrane was no longer just a lipid bubble, but a complex barrier studded with proteins that carefully controlled what entered and exited. Inside the cell, the cytoplasm was a liquid medium filled with proteins, RNA, and other molecules performing thousands of chemical reactions simultaneously. Each cell's DNA contained complete instructions for building and operating that cell. These instructions were carefully copied every time the cell divided. Copying errors, mutations, still occurred, but they were rare. Most cells were faithful copies of their parent cell. These first true cells were prokaryotes, similar to modern bacteria. They had no nucleus or other internal compartments. All their DNA floated freely in the cytoplasm, but they were genuine life, capable of growing, reproducing, responding to the environment, and evolving. Chapter 13. The diversification of life. With the evolution of true cells, life on Nyxthar exploded in diversity. Different cell lineages adapted to different niches in the deep ocean. Some thrived in the very hot waters near hydrothermal vents, where temperatures approached boiling. Others preferred the cold waters far from the vents. Some cells developed the ability to use environmental nitrogen, transforming it into compounds other life forms could use. These nitrogen fixers became foundational to the ecosystem because nitrogen was a limiting nutrient. Cells that formed symbiotic associations with nitrogen fixers thrived. Other cells specialized in breaking down complex organic compounds, recycling materials from dead organisms. These decomposers were essential for keeping the nutrient cycle functioning. Without them, nutrients would get locked in complex molecules no one else could use. Even a primitive form of predation emerged. Some cells developed mechanisms to invade other cells and consume their contents. This created an evolutionary arms race. Prey cells developed better defenses, forcing predators to develop better attack strategies. Chapter 14. The Great Orbital Shift. While life flourished in the depths of Nyxthar's ocean, cosmic forces were reshaping the solar system. Gravitational interactions between the forming giant planets, especially Jupiter and Saturn, caused a massive reorganization of planetary orbits. Nyxthar, still in the outer regions of the solar system, was caught in this gravitational turbulence. Its orbit became unstable. Slowly, over millions of years, Nyxthar began to migrate inward through the solar system, gradually approaching the distant sun. This migration had profound consequences. As Nyxthar moved into more inner regions of the solar system, the solar radiation reaching the planet gradually increased. The frozen surface began to receive more energy. Processes that had been dormant for billions of years began to awaken. The rate of bombardment by comets and asteroids also changed. Nyxthar now crossed more debris-populated regions of the solar system. Impacts became more frequent. Each major impact melted part of the frozen surface, injecting water vapor into the thin atmosphere and potentially exposing the subsurface ocean to outer space. Chapter 15. The Challenge of Change. For life in Nyxthar's ocean, the planet's orbital migration brought challenges. The planet's thermal balance was shifting. The amount of heat Nyxthar received from the sun, though still minuscule compared to Earth, was increasing. This affected ocean circulation and nutrient distribution. Some environments that had been stable for billions of years began to change. Hydrothermal vents that had operated continuously for eons cooled as Nyxthar's mantle lost heat. New vents opened in other places as tectonic stresses redistributed in the planet's crust. Cells that had perfectly adapted to specific conditions suddenly found themselves in different environments. Many lineages went extinct, unable to adapt quickly enough. But others thrived, their genetic diversity providing variants that, by chance, were suited to the new conditions. The orbital shift also increased comet bombardment, which brought a disguised blessing. Comets were rich in organic compounds and water. Each impact delivered a load of nutrients to Nyxthar's ocean, fertilizing the microbial ecosystem and allowing the cell population to grow. Chapter 16. Endosymbiosis. Among the most important evolutionary innovations that occurred during this era of change was endosymbiosis. One cell engulfed another, but instead of digesting it, the two cells formed a partnership. The inner cell retained its own membrane and genome, living inside the host cell. This partnership was mutually beneficial. The inner cell, specialized in extracting energy from chemical reactions, provided abundant energy to the host cell. In return, the host provided protection and nutrients. Over time, the inner cell became so integrated that it could no longer live independently. It had become a mitochondrion, the power plant of eukaryotic cells. This endosymbiotic event was transformative. Eukaryotic cells, with their mitochondria, had far more energy available than prokaryotic cells. This allowed them to evolve more complex structures. They developed nuclei to protect their DNA. They created specialized internal compartments for different cellular functions. With more energy and structural complexity, eukaryotic cells could grow much larger than their prokaryotic cousins. Some eukaryotic cells on Nyxthar reached sizes visible to the naked eye, giants compared to the tiny bacteria that still numerically dominated the ocean. Chapter 17. The emergence of multicellularity. Individual cells had limitations. There's a maximum size a single cell can reach before nutrients can no longer diffuse efficiently to its interior. But if cells could cooperate, forming multicellular aggregates, those limitations could be overcome. The first multicellular creatures on Nyxthar were simple colonies of identical cells stuck together. There was no specialization. Each cell was like the others. But these colonies had advantages. They were too large for individual predatory cells to attack. They could create currents that brought nutrients to all cells in the colony. Over time, division of labor emerged in the colonies. Some cells specialized in capturing nutrients, others in reproduction, still others in protection against predators. A colony with specialized cells was more efficient than one of identical cells. Complex multicellularity had been born. These first multicellular creatures were still very simple, perhaps similar to modern sponges. But they were a revolutionary step. Life on Nyxthar was no longer limited to microscopic existences. Organisms the size of millimeters, then centimeters, eventually meters, began to populate the ocean depths. Chapter 18. Complex ecosystems. Around Nyxthar's hydrothermal vents, complex and strange ecosystems had evolved. These oases of life in the deep, dark ocean were densely populated by creatures adapted to conditions that would be lethal to most terrestrial life forms. At the base of each ecosystem were chemosynthesizers, microscopic organisms that extracted energy from the vent's chemical compounds. These microbes were so numerous that they formed thick mats over the rocks around the vents, coloring them red, orange, and green with their pigments. Grazing on these microbial mats were larger creatures, similar to worms or snails, that scraped the mats with specialized structures. Some of these creatures had formed symbiotic partnerships with the microbes, housing them in special chambers in their bodies and benefiting from the nutrients the microbes produced. Predators lurked on the edges of the vent communities. Creatures similar to squids or shrimp, though unrelated to those terrestrial animals, hunted the herbivores. They had specialized sensory organs that detected vibrations and chemical compounds in the water, allowing them to hunt in total darkness. Chapter 19. The Catastrophe. Then, without warning, the catastrophe came. A mountain-sized asteroid, dislodged from the asteroid belt by Jupiter's gravitational influence, collided with Nyxthar. The impact was devastating, releasing energy equivalent to millions of nuclear bombs. Nyxthar's ice crust cracked over an area the size of a continent. Subsurface ocean water, which had never seen starlight, was catapulted into space, freezing instantly in the vacuum. A column of vapor and ice rose thousands of kilometers above the planet's surface. The shockwave from the impact propagated through Nyxthar's ocean at supersonic speeds. When it reached the ocean floor, it destabilized hydrothermal vents, some closing permanently while others opened violently. Internal tsunamis shook the ocean from pole to pole. Life on Nyxthar was severely affected. Entire ecosystems were obliterated instantly. Species that had evolved for billions of years went extinct in hours. Nyxthar's biodiversity plummeted as waves of extinction propagated through the wounded planet. Chapter 20. Recovery. But life is resilient. In the depths of Nyxthar's ocean, in protected pockets that escaped the worst of the catastrophe, survivors persisted. They were often generalist species, able to survive in a variety of conditions, or species living in remote environments unaffected by the impact. With dominant ecosystems destroyed, the survivors found a world of opportunities. Empty ecological niches waited to be filled. Evolution accelerated as surviving species diversified rapidly, adapting to exploit new resources and environments. New forms of life emerged, experimenting with body plans and life strategies never attempted before. Some of these innovations failed, but others succeeded spectacularly. In just a few million years, Nyxthar's biodiversity had recovered, and new lineages of creatures populated the ocean. The catastrophe had been terrible, but it also freed evolution from old patterns. The post-impact world of Nyxthar was different from what came before, inhabited by strange and wonderful creatures that could never have evolved without the ecosystem reset the impact provided. Chapter 21. The Fate of Nyxthar. The story of Nyxthar, unfortunately, had a tragic end. As the planet continued its inward migration through the solar system, its orbit became increasingly unstable. Close gravitational encounters with other planets became more frequent and more disruptive. Eventually, Nyxthar passed too close to a giant planet, possibly Saturn or Jupiter. The immense gravity of the gas giant distorted Nyxthar, causing tidal forces that tore the planet apart. The cracked frozen crust shattered, the ocean boiled, and the planet's very structure was destroyed. Nyxthar was torn to pieces. Some fragments were captured as moons by the giant planets. Others were flung into interstellar space, doomed to wander the galaxy forever. Most fell toward the sun, vaporizing in the intense heat or colliding with other planets. One of the largest fragments, still containing a significant portion of Nyxthar's ocean and some of its frozen life forms, was hurled into an erratic orbit. For millions of years, this fragment traveled through the inner solar system, passing near young planets, until it finally encountered a blue, water-covered world. Primitive Earth. Chapter 22. The Legacy. When the fragment of Nyxthar collided with primitive Earth about 3.9 billion years ago, it carried something precious: life. Frozen in the fragment's ice, preserved in a state of suspended animation, were cells and spores of organisms that had evolved in Nyxthar's dark ocean. The impact melted the ice, releasing its contents into Earth's primordial ocean. Most of Nyxthar's organisms died instantly, unable to adapt to the vastly different conditions of this strange world. But some, through an extraordinary combination of luck and pre-existing adaptability, survived. These survivors found themselves in a radically different environment from their home world. Earth had abundant sunlight, something Nyxthar never had. It had a dense atmosphere and different ocean chemistry. But it also had abundant liquid water and hydrothermal vents similar to those on Nyxthar. The descendants of these Nyxthar refugees mingled with the life that was already beginning to evolve independently on Earth. Genes were exchanged between lineages through a process called horizontal gene transfer. Modern terrestrial life may therefore carry traces of its past on two worlds. Chapter 23. Evidence in the present today, billions of years later, we can see possible echoes of Nyxthar in terrestrial life. Certain extremophiles, which live in environments that seem impossible for life, may be direct descendants of Nyxthar's colonists. Bacteria that thrive in deep-sea hydrothermal vents, kilometers below the surface where no sunlight penetrates, may be following metabolic strategies originally developed on Nyxthar. Their reliance on chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis, their tolerance for extreme temperatures and pressures, all of this may be an inheritance from a lost world. Some of the oldest branches on Earth's tree of life, organisms like methanogenic archaea that produce methane gas, have characteristics suggesting origins in oxygen-free, lightless environments, exactly like Nyxthar's ocean. Do these ancient lineages preserve secrets from another world? Scientists studying the origin of life on Earth are sometimes puzzled by certain complexities that seem to have arisen too early in terrestrial life's history. Could it be that this complexity didn't evolve here but was imported, already developed, from an older world where life had billions of extra years to evolve? Chapter 24. Modern Oceanic Worlds. The story of Nyxthar, though hypothetical, finds parallels in real worlds we know today. Moons like Europa, orbiting Jupiter, and Enceladus, orbiting Saturn, have subsurface oceans remarkably similar to the one we imagine on Nyxthar. Europa has a thick ice crust covering a global ocean that contains more water than all of Earth's oceans. Hydrothermal vents on the bottom of that ocean could provide the energy needed for life. When spacecraft fly over Europa, they detect plumes of water vapor jetting from cracks in the ice, suggesting active geological activity. Enceladus is smaller but no less fascinating. Geysers of water and organic compounds erupt from its south pole, expelling contents from its subsurface ocean into space. Analyses of these plumes have revealed complex organic molecules, exactly the types of compounds that would form life's building blocks. Titan, Saturn's largest moon, has lakes and seas of liquid methane on its surface but may also have a water ocean beneath its crust. Each of these worlds is a potential Nyxthar, a place where life may have arisen independently from Earth, following evolutionary paths shaped by unique environments. Chapter 25. Searching for Life Beyond Earth. The story of Nyxthar teaches us something important about where and how to search for life in the universe. For decades, the search for extraterrestrial life focused on planets in the habitable zone around stars, where temperatures allow liquid water on the surface. But Nyxthar suggests that life can thrive far from any sun. Subsurface oceans warmed by internal forces, not stellar light, may be far more common in the universe than surface habitable planets. Nearly every solar system has icy worlds in its outer regions. If a significant fraction of them have subsurface oceans, then there are potentially billions of habitats for life in our galaxy alone. Future space missions plan to visit Europa and Enceladus specifically to search for signs of life. Some missions may drill through the ice to reach the ocean below. Others may analyze material from the plumes these worlds eject into space, looking for chemical signatures of biological processes. If we find life on these oceanic worlds, it will be one of the most important discoveries in human history. It would prove that life is not exclusive to Earth, that it can arise wherever suitable conditions exist. And it would give us insights into radically different forms of life from what we know, adapted to environments that seem alien to us. Chapter 26. The Chemistry of Possibility. The plausibility of a world like Nyxthar is not just romantic speculation but is based on solid chemistry and physics. We know that chemical reactions can provide energy for life independent of sunlight. Hydrothermal vents on Earth sustain entire ecosystems that rely on nothing from photosynthesis. We know that liquid water can exist beneath layers of ice, kept in that state by a planet's or moon's internal heat. That heat can come from radioactive decay or tidal forces, when a larger planet's gravity stretches and compresses a moon, generating heat through internal friction. We know that complex organic molecules, the building blocks of life, form easily in space environments, They are found in comets, asteroids, and the atmospheres of giant planets. These molecules are not life themselves, but they are the necessary ingredients. We know that life, once established, is extraordinarily adaptable. Terrestrial organisms thrive in environments ranging from 120 degrees Celsius in hot springs to minus 20 degrees Celsius in Antarctic ice. They live in strong acids, in extremely alkaline conditions, under crushing pressures, and in radiation that would kill most life forms. Chapter 27. Reflections on Origin. The story of Nyxthar makes us question fundamental assumptions about the origin of life. On Earth, we generally assume life began in sunlit environments, perhaps in tidal pools warmed by the sun or in shallow oceans. But what if that's not the only way, or even the most common way? Perhaps life begins more often in deep oceans, around hydrothermal vents, in total darkness. Such environments are more stable than surfaces exposed to intense stellar radiation, meteor impacts, and dramatic climate changes. A subsurface ocean offers protection and stability. If life really arose on Nyxthar and was later transported to Earth, it has profound implications. It means terrestrial life is not entirely terrestrial in origin. We are, in a sense, aliens, descendants of organisms that evolved on another world under radically different conditions. Even if life on Earth didn't come specifically from Nyxthar but arose here independently, the possibility of worlds like Nyxthar suggests that life may have multiple origins in our own solar system. Perhaps life arose on Mars when that planet was young and wet, or on Venus before it turned into the hell it is today. Chapter 28. The Anthropic Principle. There's something disturbing, yet also wonderful about considering that our existence may depend on the destruction of an entire world. If Nyxthar really existed, and if terrestrial life carries its legacy, then the catastrophe that destroyed that planet was necessary for our eventual existence. This illustrates a profound truth about the universe. Creation and destruction are intimately linked. Stars must die, exploding in supernovas to create the heavy elements that make up rocky planets and living bodies. Planets must collide and shatter to redistribute materials, and perhaps even life throughout the solar system. This principle of creation through destruction operates at all scales. At the molecular level, old molecules must be broken down so their components can be rearranged into new forms. At the ecological level, mass extinctions open niches for new life forms to thrive. At the cosmic level, entire solar systems are recycled over billions of years. Nyxthar, if it existed, was a victim of this cosmic recycling. But its death may have been meaningful, seeding life on another world, allowing evolution to continue in a new, possibility-rich environment. There's no sadness or purpose in it, just the blind operation of physical laws. But the outcome is remarkable nonetheless. Chapter 29. Implications for Astrobiology. The possibility of a world like Nyxthar completely reframes how we think about habitability in the universe. Traditionally, astrobiologists focused on searching for Earth twins, rocky planets of the right size at the right distance from their stars. But this may be too narrow a view. If life can thrive in subsurface oceans, then the number of potentially habitable worlds in the universe is far greater than we thought. Nearly every star has planets, and nearly every planetary system has icy worlds in outer orbits. If even a small fraction of these worlds have subsurface oceans, then habitats for life are extremely common. This also means our search for life shouldn't be limited to analyzing planetary atmospheres for oxygen or other biomarkers. Worlds with subsurface oceans may have completely sterile surfaces and atmospheres with no obvious signs of life, even as complex ecosystems thrive in the depths below. We need new strategies to detect life on such worlds. Looking for plumes of ejected material, as we see on Enceladus, may be one approach. Analyzing the isotopic composition of surface materials may reveal signs of subsurface biological processes. Studying heating patterns may indicate hydrothermal activity that could sustain life. Chapter 30. The question of panspermia. The theory of panspermia proposes that life, or at least its building blocks, can travel between worlds. The story of Nyxthar is an example of panspermia in action. A catastrophic impact ejects material from the inhabited world. That material travels through space for millions of years and eventually seeds life on another world. Evidence for panspermia in the solar system is circumstantial but intriguing. We know that Martian meteorites regularly hit Earth, having been ejected from the red planet by large impacts. If microorganisms could survive inside those rocks, protected from space radiation, then life transfer between planets is not only possible but likely. Experiments have shown that certain terrestrial microorganisms can survive exposure to space vacuum, intense radiation, and extreme temperature cycles. Bacterial spores in particular are extraordinarily resilient. If protected inside a rock, they could survive multi-million-year journeys through space. If panspermia really occurred in our solar system, it has profound implications. It means Mars, Earth, and perhaps other worlds may share a common biosphere, with life exchanged between them over billions of years. The life we find on Mars, if any, may be our distant cousin, not a truly alien form of life. Chapter 31. Lost Civilizations. Sometimes in moments of bolder speculation we might wonder, what if life on Nyxthar had had enough time to evolve intelligence? It's unlikely, given that Nyxthar was destroyed relatively early in the solar system's history. But what if it had? A civilization that evolved on a subsurface oceanic world would face unique challenges. Without access to an open surface or atmosphere, concepts like sky or stars would be alien. Their understanding of the universe would be fundamentally different from ours, shaped by an environment of darkness, pressure, and ocean currents. Such a civilization would likely never develop fire, a foundational technology for terrestrial civilizations. Without fire, metallurgy would be impossible. Their technology would follow completely different paths, perhaps based on bioengineering or harnessing natural chemical processes. Communication and senses would also be different. Without light to see, an oceanic world civilization might rely on echolocation like dolphins or electric field detection like some terrestrial fish. Their art, music, and literature would reflect a sensory experience completely alien to us. Chapter 32. The Meaning of Nyxthar. Why do we spend so much time contemplating a world that may never have existed? Because Nyxthar, real or not, represents something important. The possibility of life radically different from ours, thriving in conditions that seem impossible, following evolutionary paths we can barely imagine. Nyxthar challenges us to expand our definition of habitability, to look beyond the obvious when searching for life in the universe. It reminds us that life as we know it on Earth may be just one of countless variations on the theme of biology. The story of Nyxthar is also a parable about change and impermanence. Even an entire world, with billions of years of evolution and perhaps extraordinary biological complexity, can be erased in an instant by indifferent cosmic forces. Nothing is permanent, neither planets nor civilizations. But there's also hope in the story. Even in destruction, there can be continuity. Nyxthar's legacy, if such a world existed, may live in us, in the cells that make up our bodies, in the genes we carry. We are all, every one of us, children of the stars, but perhaps also of lost worlds whose names we will never know. Epilogue. Looking to the stars. Today, when we look at the night sky, we see thousands of stars. Orbiting many of those stars are planets. Some are gas giants like Jupiter, others are rocky worlds like Earth, and many are icy balls in the outer regions of their solar systems. How many of these icy worlds hide oceans beneath their surfaces? How many have hydrothermal vents pumping chemical energy into their dark depths? How many are, right now, cradles of life adapting, evolving, perhaps even thriving in conditions that seem hostile to life as we know it? We don't know the answers. Not yet. But the missions we're sending to Europa, Enceladus, and other oceanic worlds in our own solar system may soon give us clues. And every new discovery of exoplanets around distant stars shows us that worlds are surprisingly common in the universe. Perhaps out there somewhere, A world like Nyxthar exists now, not destroyed by the gravity of gas giants, but thriving in perpetual darkness. Perhaps at this very moment, in a subsurface ocean around a hydrothermal vent on a distant world, cells are dividing, organisms are hunting their prey, and evolution is sculpting new forms of life from the old. And perhaps, billions of years in the future, creatures from that world will look to their own stars and wonder, as we do now, are we alone? The answer, if the story of Nyxthar teaches us anything, is probably not. The universe is vast, ancient, and full of possibilities we are only beginning to imagine. Nyxthar may have been just a story, an informed scientific speculation, but the truth it represents is real. Life finds a way, even in the most unlikely circumstances, in the darkest places, in the most hostile environments. And where there is life, there is always hope, always change, always the possibility of something new and wonderful emerging. That is the true lesson of the heart of darkness, that even in the total absence of light, even in the most extreme cold, even separated from any sun, life can find a way. Not because the universe cares or because there's some cosmic purpose, but simply because the laws of chemistry and physics allow it, and because life, once started, is extraordinarily persistent. When we finally send probes to drill through Europa's ice or collect samples from Enceladus's plumes, we will, in a sense, be searching for Nyxthar. Not the specific world of this story, but the principle it represents. Life born in darkness, thriving far from any sun, following its own unique evolutionary trajectory. And if we find such life, if we discover we're not alone even in our own solar system, it will change everything. Our understanding of our place in the universe, our appreciation of life's robustness, our hope that the cosmos is full of biology in countless forms, everything will be transformed. For now, Nyxthar remains a possibility, a story that could have been or could still be happening somewhere far away. But it's a possibility worth contemplating, because it reminds us to keep our minds open, to look in unlikely places, to never assume we fully understand the limits of what's possible. In the end, whether Nyxthar is real or imaginary, the search for worlds like it, the quest for life in unexpected places, the attempt to understand how life arises and thrives in the universe, these are some of the deepest and most important questions we can ask. And the answers, when we finally find them, will teach us not just about other worlds, but about our own world and our own place in the vast and mysterious cosmos. Conclusion. The saga of Nyxthar is a 4.3 billion-year journey through time and space, a story of origin, evolution, and destruction that makes us reflect on the nature of life and our place in the universe. Although Nyxthar is an imaginary world, the scientific principles that underpin its story are real and applicable to real oceanic worlds we know today. This tale teaches us humility in the face of the cosmos, its vastness and awe at life's persistence. It shows us that habitability is not limited to narrow zones around stars, but can exist in dark, icy places we would never see as potential homes for life. And it reminds us that every world, every form of life, every moment in cosmic history is precious and unique, but also part of a larger pattern of creation, destruction, and renewal that permeates the universe.